Hey everybody, Edo here, and in this League video, I wanted to step up from the Kickstarter Basics and start talking about some Kickstarter Advanced topics. I think I'm going to do both in parallel, some of that stuff at that basic level and some of these harder concepts. I'm still calling it Kickstarter because I guess ultimately this is just about making board games and publishing, but I still feel it is most applicable to somebody doing a Kickstarter. And today I wanted to talk about custom pieces, and in particular though, the custom box that I've been working on for Heroes and Tricks, which is going to be on Kickstarter, but in particular because of the challenges and the work that had to go into making it. And as you're thinking of your game and you're thinking about how you want to approach it, I think it's worth understanding some basics and fundamentals that apply to advanced craftsmanship of game components. So, let's talk about it. So, when you're making a game, as I said in my previous video about getting a quote, right, you're going to be able to have some things just fit the game crafter or fit what a panda is going to do, right? So, when it comes to getting cards and, in essence, every single card is custom, right? Like a custom card is a card with an image on it. That's not particularly hard or challenging, and any printer can help you through that. A board isn't that custom. Things start getting different when you start using different sizes, and you want to be sure about measurements. So as you're getting into different sizes, you want to think about your box, and you want to think about how you're going to ship it, and that kind of stuff. But you're not going to run into too many physical build problems. As you start getting into other custom items, you're going to see it more. Now, custom dice are pretty manageable and trivial right now. They're just going to ask you for what you want these images to be, and they'll ask you whether you want it engraved or molded, and there'll be some questions there, but there isn't that much around making dice. Same with die cuts. I mean, having a die cut item, other than how thick it is, what the material is, all that stuff, you're basically going to just send a die line of where you want things to be cut and the image you're going to put on top of it. Now, one of the things you keep in mind when you start dealing with this is how big's your box, how many sheets do you want inside of it, and then how are you going to fit your components on it. And as you start getting into that grade of things, you do run into little things like gem pack cards, right? It's shipped with 7 punch-out boards in this box, which limited the amount of room there was for the insert. I'm not going to open it all up, the insert. And so one of the things I ran into it, and if you have gem pack cards, you know this, is the plastic insert isn't quite as deep as it should, and the last gem pack card in each stack sort of rides the top, and if you shake it around, they can pop out a little bit. And that had to do with the fact that I couldn't make it any bigger because it wouldn't have fit in the box. Along the same lines, the lift-off board, again, nothing crazy, nothing that a publisher was like, what are you talking about? This was an interlocking board, and rather than a normal one, we did a puzzle cut, which is a finer cut, but thinking about how these pieces notch together and fit is important. Now, some lessons learned here was, as cool as these nice little ridges are here, I should have done more of the notch approach. I didn't need it to have this much of a sort of punch in or a little lip in, and that makes for some sticky pieces and some wear over time that, isn't going to ruin the game for anyone, but I regret. The other thing was, this big piece, to get it right, has to be cut out as one unit. I can't just cut these out separately and sort of hope it's going to work, especially because of the art. And the ramifications there was this board piece was bigger than the box. So then I had to pay per box. Now, it wasn't that bad, but they come pre-punched. Somebody does that, right? There's no machine that pre-punches it. It gets punched and assembled and put together and put in the box, and you pay for that in time from your manufacturer. So getting into this kind of stuff, you start running into that place, and this is where you are going to start hitting these guidelines I'm going to give you. As you work on little wooden meeples that are custom meeples and custom paint, you also start running into that stuff. You run into, what does it mean to have multiple layers of paint? What does it mean to how sharp should you make your cuts, how thick should they be, should they stand. Earlier in this earlier in this video, I by mistake blew over this guy, right? Part of that has to do with how big its base is. So as you move into crafting and creating physical items, much like a game, much like you do in your design iteration, you need to see, feel, and touch the thing as you progress, and as you go, you got to get that iteration time in, and you need to have a printing partner that's willing to work with you. A category I'm not going to speak to right now is miniatures, and while that's pretty commonplace, I know there's all sorts of mistakes you can make in miniatures in terms of size, thickness of items, level of detail, right? So I just can't speak to it because I haven't done any miniatures yet. So let's talk about that process. So I'm going to take these guys off of here for a second. I'm going to set it aside, and I want to talk about heroes and tricks in these boxes and this ongoing process and why it's so important to, 1, figure out your game design. Before you really get deep into manufacturing components and working through different levels of complexity, you really want to understand what your gameplay is and what your need is for your physical product and how it's going to be used by the player, right? A great example is square cards versus normal poker-sized cards. Square cards are no fun to hold in your hand in a splay. Like having a hand of square cards is awkward. If your game has your players keeping their cards in their hands a long time, don't use square cards, use poker cards. They're easier to read, they're easier to hold. Just like those little, Ticket to Ride cards or the little itty bitty, think about how players are going to use it. If they're just sitting on the board or being dealt out and sort of staying face down like they're goal cards or something, that's one thing. But think about how your player is going to be handling it. So understanding your game and then how your component is used in your game is critical. Okay. So first step is understand the game and then understand how those meeples are standing. Understand how the dice are used. Understand how your cards are being touched. That way you're making the right physical component choice for the gameplay mechanic. It's much like I just did a video on theme and mechanic and how theme needs to overlap mechanic. Well, there's this other line that most designers don't have to think about, but as a publisher you do, as a Kickstarter creator you do, is the vector of game component physicality to game mechanic to theme. What does it feel like to hold these in your hand? How evocative it is. That great sensation of holding a wad of dice in your hand, right, is a big deal. The snap on the Sheriff of Nottingham little, that's important. As is that button going to wear? Is it going to work 100 times? Is it going to work 200 times? Okay? So I think over the course of this Heroes and Trick development cycle, which I'm thrilled about, I think this is such a cool custom box component, I hit tons of them. Okay, so Heroes and Tricks, just briefly, is a trick-taking game where the idea is you can play it on the go and in your hands. Essentially, I was playing Fortune and Glory or some really long game and I was sort of bored, and I wanted to be able to play a game while playing that game. So I wanted a game in a box that you could pass around and play while the other thing was playing, right? And so initially, I started prototyping with something I could find, with a box, right? And so one of these has game cards in them. Let's grab, okay. So I started with my cards, putting my cards inside the box and playing this game with other people and feeling what it was like and seeing it as you passed around. It was through this phase of, hey, it's in the box, I've got to open it up every time. Opening the box and sort of looking in the back and leaning it back sort of sucked. I really didn't like it. It didn't feel good. It wasn't right. And so through this prototype, I was like, And then also John Gilmore participated, as well as the art team and Dustin and Ben at different phases. But I'll use I to keep it simple, but everyone was involved. We all messed with this, as was playtesters. Then looked at, what would happen if we did this? What would happen if we added and cut out a little lip here so that you could see the badge number on the cards? And suddenly it just worked. Being able to look at and feel the cards and see them in the box made a big, big difference. We also ended up adding, for other things, like for example, by playtesting, we added these, they turned into black borders, but it used to be color to the edge, but cards would slide around. So seeing that give of the cards in the box made a big deal. But this was getting, I'm not going to buy these and hand them out. So we went and we started looking at what would it be like to just use a standard deck box. This was from the Game Crafter, and cutting out that corner. And in working on this, and all these cards are going to be at different stages. These have the black border, for example. But as we were playing this game and we sort of hit this point, it became very clear that this game needed this box to be a component. It was fundamental how you held it, how you played it, how it moved around the board. You could still play it on a table, but to have it on the go, this was a big deal. And talked it over, started looking at prices, and decided that I wasn't going to ship it this way. This wasn't good enough for the gameplay component. And that was a huge decision, because this is cheap, or cheaper. This is not as cheap. And for a game that needs to be, it's 2 decks of cards with maybe a $20 game, the more expensive these components, the more they move into your margins. But it was just really important. So one of the things that happens as you go custom, just as a rule, the more, maybe not perfect rule, but just to keep, the more custom, the more expensive. The more custom, the more iteration. Those are really clear ideas. And if you want to keep costs down, and you want to keep iteration down, and you want to, know that it is just going to work, stay away from custom, just use standard stuff. In many cases, that is great. All right, so decided to move and I started fabricating boxes, and then I worked with Watts Games, who were fantastic through this process, to start making white boxes of this design. And you can see this first one came out, and you'll see this red mark and lines on it, and I just started feeling like, the window that they cut was too small, the lip was awkward where it was, and in particular, there's an insert in the middle, and the insert is perfectly centered. But what would happen is, as we play tested on this, right, you need to be testing custom components in games, was that middle divider had things sit back and not towards the front of the box. So at this point, we refined the design further, right? So the game was clear. How the component needed to fit was clear, but we're working through this process. So then we've got to this version, which has that longer top. It has this forward sitting divider in the middle. Now in this version, I think the insert comes out, which ultimately was another thing that became a problem, because as people played it, they were getting pieces stuck in front of the insert, right? These aren't things you'd think about. I mean, if I had done this 1,000 times, or not 1,000, but if I had made many custom complicated boxings and really became a purveyor of this kind of stuff, yeah, maybe I would have that foresight. But I think for most people, you don't. This is a Kickstarter. This is the first time you've done any of this. So the only way to defend against that is take nothing for granted, check your versions, refine. So this version, and some of these I actually started to have to pay for. So Heroes and Tricks has more, as basically from this side on, I'm having to pay more iteration that I had to pay for manufacturing to get me singles and versions of. So this one, we wanted to put the art around it and take a look. And so what ends up happening here, the big lesson here was we felt we need another divider, but as much as it was easy to pop this lid to get in behind, this happened, right? The magnet is strong enough for this purpose, but not strong enough for this purpose, right? And that's a problem because people put this in the bag. You want it to be on the go. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be good enough that it's not going to I'm not going to flip it over. And so, magnet strength, really, I'm worried about magnet strength? I have no idea what magnet, how is magnet strength measured, right? So what can I do? I say, hey, Watts, we're going to do it again, but I need a stronger magnet, okay? And they gave me a stronger magnet, but it's so strong that moving this box open now is not fun. It's too hard. for the amount of times players shouldn't struggle, it feels like it's going to wear. This is a strong magnet. It snaps. It's got, but the only way you could possibly resolve this, the only way you could possibly understand that the Goldilocks, too soft, too strong, how do we get to just right, is by touching it and feeling it and testing it. And actually in this version, Watts on their own tried to do this divider in the middle, but it didn't have the give, it didn't push the cards forward as much, so I wanted them to go back. Another neat thing that came out of just using it, this is serendipitous, not pronounced correctly, but everyone was passing around the cards, and we had a card that showed like the, how the suits and colors work in Heroes and Tricks and how trumps work as a trick-taking game. And John said, why can't we put that on the inside of the box? Sold. That is awesome, right? So now, this wasn't planned, but now everyone, when they go to play their card, they have their crib sheet with all the information need right there. It's right there and available. And had we moved through this quickly, had we not iterated and played, aside from all these things that we missed, we wouldn't have gotten that, right? So again, I'm just trying to reiterate, once you start getting into this level of complexity of components, you are going to need to touch it and feel it, and you can't take anything for granted. Even partners who do things like, for good reason, added a sturdier insert, but then took away from the gameplay because a manufacturer isn't going to have that nuance, okay? But we're not done, unfortunately. And one of the things that became clear was, as a component in a game, it would suck. Not suck is a strong word, but like to have all the the barcode and the cell information and all the game details on the box when it's a game component feels weird. Like, it's not the end of the world. I could have it all over, but it's going to be crammed on this box, and it's not going to feel as special. And I really want this. This is Kickstarter. I make this for the love of what we're doing, and I really want everyone to love the product. And it just seemed weird to me to have all that information around, right? So, now we have a sleeve that is there as well. Not the end of the world on expense ad, but not free either. And this one came up right to the lip, was a little too far. So, had to have a little bit of a gap. And then on this one, also found that in a two-player game towards the end, the cards didn't fit in the back of the box as much as they needed to fit in the front. So in order to accommodate it, I had to make this box a little thicker. Whatever, 8 millimeters. So this is now, by the way, final button. A little weird thing, got to talk to them. The magnet is not quite as strong again. So I got to find out, did they maybe put the old magnet back in? Perhaps. Or possibly the torque, might not be the right word, but there's some difference in the width here. Well, now I'm going to go with a stronger magnet because of how this thing works, and then that might be okay. So I got to figure that out, but that's the stage I'm at. Love the box, gameplay tested, everything works. And it's not the end of the word, but if I shook this hard enough, it would come out. I want that magnet thing to be addressed. So, and then we got to put all the art back on it, right? And work out the details of the sleeve. So, absolutely worth it. Absolutely worth working through and making a fantastic component and game and element if it's important to you. Just realize, like game design, like iteration, you need to get these things prototyped, tested, touched. You need to make sure that they support your mechanic, they support your theme, they support the game, they don't take away from it. Make the right decisions on your components. Find people who have done it as well. So I know this was detailed, but I hope that it gave some perspective on the different sort of places pitfalls you might have along the way. Again, if you're going to make miniatures, find a miniature guy to give you some perspective. So subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Most importantly, make some great games with great components. Okay? Thanks.